And now with the country coming to a lull after accepting that Emmerson Mnangagwa won the presidential vote, Zimbabwe seems to have come to a clash. Those who are proud of the new dawn and those who are not so convinced that the dawn is any newer than the previous Mugabe regime. And joining us to delve into this further is Aditi Lalbahadur, and who's a senior researcher and program manager of foreign policy at SAIIA, and Glen Mpani, who's a managing partner at Shikamo Political Campaign and Advisory Services. Many thanks for your time this afternoon, Aditi. I hope I did say your name correctly.
It's fine. Thanks, yeah.
Let's start with you. And there was commentary coming out after we saw that violence where 6 people subsequently have lost their lives, the US even saying something, and really just to maybe allude to what the interest said about the realness of this new dawn. Does it really exist?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big question on everyone's, that everyone is concerned with, and there was a big concern around that even in the run-up to the election. The fact of the matter is that the way in which power is sort of centralized in Zimbabwe is not very much different to the way it was under President Mugabe. And so you really have to question whether or not the elections will have a substantive outcome, in terms of changing the society for something better. There was a slew of reforms that were suggested at the 2008 Government of National Unity that haven't been implemented. And those really ranged from everything from opening up the civil society space through to through electoral reforms, judiciary reforms, reforms to the media that haven't really taken place. And so, in essence, changing the leadership doesn't necessarily change the society.
Glen, let's talk about that 50.8% vote. Is that very convincing, to be honest, to avoid a runoff?
I think we are focusing on the wrong question. And I think this is the challenge when we discuss Zimbabwe. Talking about an election from a government that got in through a coup is obviously an anathema in democracy. Zimbabwe is currently confronted with a security sector crisis. A security sector crisis which, even if Nelson Chamisa would win, he won't govern. Even if Emmerson Mnangagwa gets in, he won't govern, because the security is now entrenched in the politics of the country. So all decisions that are now being made by the military. So running an election in a country that is governed by a military does not work, because what we are simply trying to produce does not work, because the structures and functions of governance are of a military state. So the issue of 50.8, so even if Nelson goes to court and disputes these elections, the courts are captured by the army. They will not allow him to govern. So Zimbabwe is in a deeper crisis. So there is no new dawn. Zimbabwe is sliding into a security country that is managed by an unhinged military. That is the reality that people need to confront and analyze it effectively. Because once you do that, you're able to understand who holds power and who is in charge and what is the future of the country.
But what does this do for the policy environment? Maybe, Aditi, you can come through here. The policy environment in Zimbabwe, you've just heard there, if the country's being run by the military, this investment talk that Emmerson Mnangagwa has been talking about and really revitalizing the economy, how does that even begin to happen?
Well, I think it's an issue around really what Glen has been talking about is actually the issue of the deep state. Who really holds power in Zimbabwe, and it's not actually in the government. So there's the only way in which you're able to affect any change is change that is acceptable to the people who really hold the power, which in this case is the military. So in as much as there's an impetus and a need for Zimbabwe re-engaging with the rest of the world and in sort of seeking out investments, the question around actually the parallel economy that has been thriving for the past 30 years, the question around the misallocation of public finance management, for instance, the way in which the government has been accountable, these are all issues that haven't really been addressed. And so you get all of this money coming in from foreign investment. Where does it go? How is it managed? Those are questions that haven't been answered and are not likely to be answered until you really interrogate the power structure of Zimbabwe.
Right. One thing that's very fascinating was the talk around the IMF coming to the table, if at all it is a credible election. Now, that's a very big if from what I'm hearing, at least, and all the reports coming out of Zimbabwe. Do you think the IMF, the US, maybe the World Bank, are about to buy into this kangaroo court of an election?
I think the IMF, the World Bank, and the US were very skeptical about the credibility that might emerge from these elections. I think Britain experimented. Britain assumed that they could sanitize and do a public relations on this government and be able to run with it and come up with an outcome that can enable them to move forward. But what has happened so far raises fundamental questions. You might want to put in your money, like what she has raised. There are a number of questions. There are high levels of corruption. Emmerson Mnangagwa got in, he got 7 months. He did not even deal with any of the corruption in that government. You look at his policy slant when he was in government. When he's in government, the deals that he's making, the levels of transparency and accountability around them, all of them, they just show you the disposition of a government that has not changed the mindset. What they want is to create a facade of a government that is interested in being democratic, to retain power. But the reality of it is that Zimbabwe is far from it. And so it's important, even when you're looking at policy and investment, for one to be able to understand that there is now a level of heightened risk, which is much higher than during the 38 years of Mugabe's leadership. At least during the 38 years of you knew the man, you knew what you were saying. Now there are handlers that you don't know, and they are not in the public space.
Better the devil you know than the angel you don't.
Yeah. So that's the reality that one needs to look at, to say if you don't know now. You look at what happened during elections. The president doesn't know who ordered firing of people in the streets. Who did that? The president doesn't know who ordered journalists to be blocked to have a press conference. So there are two centers of power that are very evident. And the one who has got cohesive mechanisms ultimately prevails.
I don't even know what to say. I think it's a devastating story. I think there was so much hope. And I just want to get into the fact that Emmerson Mnangagwa, that what happened there and the questions that came out of who ordered the military to go out into the streets and to shoot at the people. How does he wiggle himself out of this and perhaps get back some trust in terms of being serious about turning Zimbabwe around?
Well, I think the first thing, which is a very unlikely thing, is to actually for him to declare that he wants to hold those people to account, to actually find out who it was that did this and hold them to account. And to my knowledge, there hasn't been any pronouncement like that, which then signals to you exactly what we've been talking about, is that who holds the power, who makes the decisions, and are they held accountable? So in many ways, you could say that Mnangagwa being in power is a kind of veneer that has been, of a government, of interlocutors that you'd want to engage with as a foreign entity if you want to engage on Zimbabwe. But it's not necessarily, they're not necessarily the people who have the power in Zimbabwe.
Glenn, I personally believe in maybe solution-based journalism, and you know what? The election has happened. We're not going to take it back. I was reading a report here from the World Bank that says Zimbabwe can be a middle-income status country because of its education sector. Now, the biggest export, of course, is human capital, which unrivaled, at least on the continent, sub-Saharan Africa. Do you get this? How do we move forward, at least using the fundamentals that the country already has and what has already happened?
We cannot run away from a security sector reform. I think we need to deal with security sector reform.
But how do you start?
How do you start? I think an honest conversation needs to take place. Regional bodies which deal with issues of security, people like ISS that work on security sector, they need to confront the devil in the room to say, this is where the problem is. One, if I was to deal with the security sector in Zimbabwe, you need to understand what are the fears and interests of those who are in the security sector.
Do you have a name for us?
No, they're evident. I think they're very evident. The vice president was the commander in army, General Chiwenga. You need to have a conversation with him. What are your fears? What are your interests? You need to talk to S.B. Moyo, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who is a former general in the army. What are your interests? You need to talk to parents. You need to talk to people who are at the top of the commanding arm of the military get to understand their interest and get them to accept a reform where they withdraw from public life and get back into being the army. That way it gives confidence to an investor, to anybody, to say, we are running a country effectively. If they want to get out of being in the army, they need to go through a process of properly retiring. You can't have a leg in public office and a leg in the army. It doesn't work. So that way, you can now start talking about how do we move the country forward. Them trying to replicate regimes, and I've heard some of them say, you know what, the Singapore model, they were not transitioned that way. They didn't work like that. So I think this cut and paste model of regimes, it doesn't work. Zimbabwe has got a different trajectory. So it will not work.
And perhaps on that note, Aditi, perhaps you can, as Arnold has said, it has happened, it's done. How does the ZANU-PF as a movement move from being a liberation movement to a political party that is running an economy?
Well, I think that's the million-dollar question.
You know, the military issues, yeah.
I mean, if they were able to have done that, they probably would have done that a long time ago. And I think they would probably be able to sell that model to the rest of Southern Africa, actually. But I think what I want to sort of draw on from what Glen was saying is actually there's also an important role that the international community can play in this process. Is for the first time in very many decades, you've actually got election observers from the Commonwealth, from the EU, from the US, and they're not relying on SADC-AU pronouncements on the elections. And actually, the EU and the US have actually pinned the extension of their sanctions regime on the outcomes of these elections. So there is a role that can be played if Zimbabwe wants to really earnestly engage with the international community and really attract foreign investment. The US and the EU actually hold the purse strings for that, and their pronouncement on what the developments are taking place right now has an impact on its ability to be able to engage with IMF, World Bank, and so on. So,
Aditi, Glen, many thanks for making time to speak to us.